Good morning. Welcome to the SCV Chambers Part 2 of our Emotional Intelligence webinar series. Thank you all for joining. We'll begin in a few minutes. Just a quick housekeeping rule I'd like to go over. In your control panel to the right of the screen, you'll see a questions box. Throughout the webinar, we'll be utilizing the questions box, so please make sure you have access to it. If you don't, go ahead and email hello@scvchamber.com. And let us know, and we'll be able to try to get it fixed over for you. And once again, we'll begin in a few minutes. For those who have just joined us, we will begin momentarily. I want to thank you again for joining part 2 of the SCV Chambers Emotional Intelligence webinar series, presented by the Chambers Focus SCV program in partnership with College of the Canyons and the Employee Training Institute. My name is Peter Warda with the Chamber, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to make a quick announcement. In partnership with the Santa Clarita Valley Economic Development Corporation, our Back to Business webinar series continues tomorrow at 10 a.m. as we hear about lessons and best practices in a business to consumer world. The webinar series will continue thereafter twice a week, discussing a post-COVID-19 business world. You can find all the information and register for the event on our website, scvchamber.com, under the Events tab. As we begin our program today, I'd like to first thank our presenter, Dr. Barbara Sweet, for helping put together this important webinar. Dr. Sweet is the president and CEO of the Learning Transfer Institute. She is an accomplished HR speaker and author of The Positive Transfer of Learning from Training to Changed Behaviors at the Job. Dr. Sweet has more than 20 years of business executive experience working with all levels of employees in the design, development, coaching, and execution of business strategies and initiatives. Today's webinar will discuss building high-performance teams and culture in a virtual world. Upon completion of this webinar, you'll be able to identify the top 2 management mistakes that interfere with effective leadership, apply emotionally intelligent communication skills to gain insights about your employees' needs and to build cooperative and trusting relationships, incorporate proven methods for overcoming employees' resistance to change and inspire a work culture of engagement, and engage in collaborative, inclusive, and creative communication practices for employees to be highly engaged and accountable for desired business results. With that, join me in welcoming Dr. Barbara Sweet. Dr. Sweet, it's all yours.
Thank you, Peter, for that warm introduction. And for those of you who attended last week's webinar, I just want to welcome you back. As you may recall, this is highly interactive. And for those that had not been part of last week's webinar, this is a separate session. However, we build upon what we learned from last week. And with that, I'll go ahead and just have the continuity from what we talked about last week and bring it to more of the team environment. So here we have the top 2 mistakes we talked about last week that interfere with leadership. The first mistake is that leaders do not manage themselves first, and that is they don't put their oxygen mask on first, and that is knowing how to regulate their emotions and be aware of how their emotions are coming across to others. The second one, and we'll do a deeper dive today, is they don't allow people the autonomy to manage themselves against shared expectations. So how can we talk about employee motivation, talking about work culture, and then how do we bring it back as a team? And fortunately, some of the skills we'll be talking about today are also transferable when we transition over to the non-virtual environment as well. So we'll start first with the interaction part of the webinar. And if you can go ahead, Peter will put a poll together, and it would be either true or false to answer this question: I can motivate others.
Thanks, Dr. Sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now. Just a quick housekeeping. If you are in full screen mode, you may need to exit to see the poll, but your screen will change now and will take a few seconds to answer. Waiting on a couple more, will take about 5 seconds. All right. All right, Dr. Sweet, we've got the answers up for everybody to see. We have 80% say true and 20% say false.
Okay, so we have the 80-20 rule into play. And if everyone can see the screen, I will go ahead and give you the answer. And the answer is, it's false. So for the 20%, give yourself 1,000 points. Motivation is an inside job. And as Phil Jackson, basketball coach, have said, is you can't force. And I apologize, I just want to make sure my screen, I'm seeing something differently. Peter, are you seeing the full screen?
Yep, it was full screen on my end. There we go.
Okay, you can't force your will on people. If you remember last week, all we have control over for ourselves is what we think, what we say, and what we do. Really, in a leadership role, if you want your employees to act differently, you need to inspire them to change themselves. But it really is an inside job. How do we do that? Well, motivational theories talk about it's intrinsic rather than extrinsic. So if we try to will our way into making them change, it looks like a sharper stick or a sweeter carrot. Instead, we look at 3 areas that were highlighted in Daniel Pink's Drive book, but the motivational theories go way back to even Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first one is autonomy. And so what you need to look at with your staff is, how can I allow them freedom to put their signature or fingerprint on a form, that I allow them to create a certain form that's used for client intake? How can I have them give the freedom to choose of how they're going to interact with the customer? Or can I give them freedom to go ahead and take on a project? So autonomy is giving them the what needs to be done, but they get to have the how. And it's been proven that a lot of people, that is very motivating for them. Now you might say as a leader, well, wait a second, what if I give too much away? And by all means, we want you still to be in control of the situation. To use a horse analogy, if we go, according to what the barn says, is when you're riding a horse, you want a loose rein, but a tight hand. And so you may not have to give all of the project to them, their freedom. Maybe you give one part of it away. I had a CFO that felt uncomfortable giving their financial analyst the reins, so to speak, to give a board presentation. So I said, well, is there any way they could put their fingerprint on the data analysis or the PowerPoint slides without giving presentation? So work in ways where they can have an input is much appreciated. Autonomy, what you would look at is their competency as well as their commitment or motivation. Bill George, the CEO of Medtronic and the author of True North, called it the sweet spot. Marcus Buckingham talks about the strengths. What strengthens us is often that sweet spots. After doing it, I feel energized by it. The next is the mastery. And what you want to do with mastery is look at how they can be a better version of themselves. And that goes back to what I was saying with Marcus Buckingham of strength base is what do I do well? And then if I have the opportunity to do that more so. There's a question that I ask in some of my trainings and ask the participants, in the last 6 months, describe a best day and what were you physically doing that task that made you feel like a best day. And it's not what happened outside their control, like a great customer interaction or, it was fully staffed, but really what they were doing. And you can't always guarantee that you can always give them a full best day, but you can have more days like that. And then finally is purpose. And the best way is to emphasize to them, because of what you do, makes someone else's life a little bit better, whether that's internally or externally. But these are the 3 ways that you really can give them an opportunity to feel that they're motivated to move forward. Have another question for you, again, true and false. There is no such thing as an unmotivated person. Is that true or false? And so we'll take it to the polls.
All right, we'll launch the poll now. In case we had a few people join us before our first poll, once again, if you are in full screen mode, you may need to just quickly exit out to see the poll, but your screen should change any second. Take a few more seconds. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll now. All right, Dr. Sweet, we've got 43% saying true and 57% saying false.
Okay, so let me go ahead and bring it to the larger screen. And then here, the answer is, it is true. Again, minority rules in this webinar. Everyone is motivated towards something. And our job as leaders is we need to find out what that is. And I'll give you a good example. I'm president of Everyday HR. So a lot of times I go into organizations and assist them with their HR needs. And one of the assistance they need from me is to help their supervisors be more timely on those crucial conversations or those courageous conversations where they have to tell their employee they need to improve their performance. And so what I let the supervisor know is where's the motivation? There's something that's really they're leaning into. And my experience with some supervisors is the motivation level of Maslow is called emotional safety. So they are motivated by being safe emotionally. They're motivated to not have that conversation because they want to avoid conflict. They're motivated not to have that conversation because of fear of being disliked with the employee, from the employee. So they are motivated. It may not be what you're hoping them to be motivated towards. In our communications, and I do see this probably one of the biggest challenges or hurdles to overcome as a supervisor is we make assumptions about our employees. And we don't first seek to understand, or in HR, we tend to investigate first. So one way of illustrating this is a poem by Valerie Cox called The Cookie Thief. And if you will let me indulge you into a poem to reading, I'm going to read that, and this will help illustrate what I mean by assumptions. In my classes, sometimes I ask if you want to close your eyes. That way your full senses of hearing is heightened, but you don't have to. So let me go ahead and read it, and then we'll debrief after. The Cookie Thief. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shops, bought a bag of cookies, and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man sitting beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag in between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. So she munched the cookies and watched the clock as the gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking if I weren't so nice, I would blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. When only one was left, she wondered what he would do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy had some nerve, and he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed to the gate, refusing to look back at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat. Then she sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There were her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned in despair, the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. And I bring that to your attention because without investigating and seeking first to understand, we tend to ride with an assumption, and we get on that assumption train and we kind of run with those emotions. And so you can imagine how we enter into a conversation like that. So one way that we can have a very structured and engaging conversation with employees, such as the one that doesn't want to talk with their employees, is to seek first to understand. How we do that, I would say, is challenge your assumptions. Too often I hear, well, they're just not motivated. And we learn from the true and false that everyone is motivated. We need to find out what their motivation, where they're leaning into. Next is to have an open mind. For example, for me, my communication style of driver, to be courageous to talk with an employee is not difficult for me. That's my wheelhouse. As a driver, I tend to be direct. But the person that I'm supervising may be more amiable, and it's very relationship oriented. So for this person, this part might be difficult. Next is to allow space. And what I mean by that is allow silence to happen during a conversation when you're trying to get input from them. In training, and this is not scientific, when I ask a question and before I give an answer, I find that when I count silently to 10 seconds, usually someone will come up and say something, because silence is sometimes awkward for people and we tend to want to fill that gap in. So allow that employee, when you really are seeking where their motivation is to allow some time for them to process. The other is put yourself on mute when you're talking to them. So when you're asking a question, it's kind of like the Zoom. When we're on mute, it still remains that person that is talking. As soon as we unmute ourselves, guess what happens? The spotlight is now on us. And in these kind of critical conversations, you don't want it to be about you at this point of the conversation. You really want to focus on their thoughts. And as soon as I do bring that over, they may, it's no longer about them, and they may start closing down a little bit. The other is reflective listening. So when they had the opportunity to express where their motivation is, what are their concerns, I might, as that leader, just reflect back and say, well, it sounds like you feel uncomfortable because you feel there's going to be strong conflict when you bring this performance issue with this employee. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like you're afraid that how this person's going to react is with anger. Or it could be they're concerned they're going to react as if it's not their fault or it's not part of their job. So we kind of talk about what their feelings are. Now at that point, they could say, Barbara, you're spot on, you get me. Or they could say, no, that's not exactly. And here's, a way I can kind of communicate in a different manner. So we want to get first a check-in that my understanding is correct. The next thing in the second part of what I would consider this conversation is consideration. So when I go into an organization and talking to that supervisor, I talk about what tools we could provide to this individual to make them feel more comfortable in that moment of having that conversation. So oftentimes we have performance tools, a script, a checklist that they can go with them. And then I would ask, would that be helpful for you? I might say resources, we teach more and do a deep dive at the College of the Canyons. Would you like to take a course in that? So anything that I can assist them with. The one thing I would say when we are doing this consideration is you may have heard of the golden rule, and we want you to put the golden rule aside. The golden rule says you do unto others as they would like done, as you would like done unto you. We're going to have you switch that. And when dealing with employee motivation and inspiration, I want you to think of the platinum rule, which is much different than the golden rule. And the platinum rule states that I do unto others as they would like done unto them. I give the gift of leadership, of support, of what they would like to receive that will move them forward, not what would work best for me. Next is opportunities to perform. So in this particular situation, and it's not unusual, I would have some role-playing scenarios. So I would tell this person, act like that employee that you're afraid of to have that conflict or conversation. And I would represent, here's some best practices of how we would respond. And then I would turn the tables to them where they can go ahead and do that as well. And then what I can do is offer support to them. So as a leader, I might say, would it be beneficial if I start the meeting, you turn it over to you, and then I end the meeting? Would that help in talking with the employee? Some may say yes, some might say all I need is for you to be in the room for that support. And another's like, the role play is just fine. So they're gonna let you know where to dial it up and where to dial it back. The other is feedback, and it's really important that we get away from the great job kind of phrase, but really meaningful, specific of what went well and what could have been done even better. And usually if I had done that role play with them, I would have said something along the lines of, where did you think you did well and where could you have done even better? And then I would give feedback. You did a great job in the introductory role play of the purpose of the meeting. And what I would do even better is when we got to the part of dealing with the emotions, one way I find helpful staying on track is to use a checklist. And that way they really get an idea that's meaningful to them of that feedback or correction. So we've gone over the second part of that conversation. And then the last part is to be understood. And this is important even from a legal perspective and an HR perspective, is you do want to make sure that we have clear understanding. So expressing the purpose and the importance of giving timely feedback. Also, it's really important to shed light in the performance gap. That timely to me means within 5 business days. And what was brought to our attention, it took 25 days for you to actually meet with the staff. So our goal or expectation is to reduce the number of days. That might be one example of a performance gap. Oftentimes you want to make sure that you describe the business impact, the so what that it's happened. And so it might be If you allow for 25 days for this incorrect behavior to happen, it may be lost revenues, it may be our reputation as a company because they continue to make a mistake. So it's really important to quantify the reason why you're bringing it to their attention. And then the action plan is, where do we go after this conversation? So you will meet with the employee, and then the next day we'll meet together to do a debrief of what went well, what didn't. The other thing that I think is really important after having this conversation that I'm coaching this supervisor of how to give a performance plan is to have an outcome of what will happen if things go well, what would happen if they choose not to do it, because motivation is an inside job, and to give them the likely outcomes of those scenarios. The other part when we're talking, so that was individually, how I would inspire them to be motivated to do the appropriate actions, such as the employee and feedback. These are 4 areas, whether I'm teaching customer service training and you're dealing with your customers or dealing with your internal coworkers. These are the 4 basic needs that we need from each other. We want to feel welcome. I do a lot of training on diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and we want that sense of feeling like we belong. Another is understood, respected, and appreciated. Now, on the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. Welcome. I say my good mornings, Barbara. I ask them how they're doing, but we're going to challenge you to do a little bit more than that. And that is, there's a great book called Deep Change, and it talks about not the, so-called slam dunks. It's the ones where it's a little bit tricky. So here are some things I would challenge you. So welcome. A lot of times we look at the culture and we look at the leader. So I would ask you, of when someone, an employee of yours, comes late to a meeting, your meeting, how do you welcome them? I've witnessed sometimes where people welcome them by being sarcastic and saying, oh, it's about time you showed up. I've seen some welcome them by just the nonverbal looking at their watch. I've seen others, they don't say anything verbally or non, but it's percolating inside the frustration. Or I could be, and this is what I do in training, and there's sometimes where people come in late, I welcome them just as if they came on time. And I would say, hey, Kyle, how are things going? We're right now on page 12 of the workbook, and one of your team members could assist you to get you to that place. Usually when they're welcomed that way on their own, they would come to me afterwards and explain the reason for their lateness. If they don't, oftentimes I would just go to them and say, how's everything? Is there anything that I can do? Is things going? And they usually will say what tripped them up. So again, culture starts with how we respond to these kind of situations. Next is understood. You just got off the phone with one of your customers and they gave you an earful about their interaction with one of your employees. How are you in terms of how does your employee feel that they've been understood and that you've heard their side of the story first? These are these deep change moments. Next is respected. They offer suggestions or ideas in your meetings, but they're a little off in their suggestions. They're not plausible. How do you respect them in still wanting to volunteer and be encouraged, yet keep it back on track with the outcome of that meeting? And then finally is appreciated. And it goes back to that correction we talked about before, and that is, if I have someone, I just coach them on how to give better performance interviews with one of their employees. Do I follow up in 2 weeks and saying, we wanted you to correct this behavior, and I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that you turned the behavior around, or you made progress of being better in your timeliness of giving performance feedback. Oftentimes we don't catch people doing things right, and mostly those individuals who have to really change and come over their comfort zone, they really need that seeds of appreciation. Next, I want to just share with you really what it comes down to from emotional intelligence. You may have heard this quote: people forget what you say, they forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And how do we make them feel during those moments? And then now we've talked about culture from a leadership perspective. Now let's talk about culture from a team perspective. And team culture, I will cover this in the acronym TRUST. And the first thing is with team culture is to talk authentically. And what that means is I don't put on a mask, I don't put on a persona. How I talk to the staff is the same way I would talk to my colleagues, same way I would talk to my boss. And that I would be transparent about my conversations. Next is rules of engagement. And how do we play nice with one another as we're having a meeting, as we're having an interaction over the emails? The phrase common sense, we would say, is not so common, that we were brought up with different experiences, so our thoughts of rules of engagement may vary. Next is understand an outcome. After I leave a meeting, and we've talked a lot, do we know where we landed? Do I know what I need to do after this meeting? I will tell you, as a driver, I crave structure and being goal-oriented. So after a meeting, I would like to know from your meeting, who's doing what, when is it due? So we'll talk more about that. The other is seek peer accountability, and I've used this effectively in my trainings and in team meetings, is rely on the peers to hold each other accountable. When there is that level of trust, it works very well, and I'll explain a little bit shortly. And then last is team results, that we don't just focus on that superstar and they kind of go alone, that we really do identify ourselves as a team. So I wanted to talk a little bit about teams. I know there may be different size companies right now here on the call, so let's cover that. Before we get into the poll, I want to kind of frame this poll. Which team is your top priority? So in some organizations, if you're large enough, you have what's called the management team. And so I'll just use me as an example. If I'm the VP of HR, the team that I'm on is the management team. And at those meetings, I'm the VP of HR, there's a VP of operations, there's a VP of finance, there's a VP of manufacturing, VP of sales. That's the team I'm a member of. Then there's also a team in which I am the leader of, and that would be my HR department. So if you have those two separations, this may be very helpful when we make this distinction. But which team should be your top priority? And that would be either the team that you're a member of or the team that you lead. Okay, and so we'll put the polls to see which should be the top priority.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and launch the poll now, and please take a few seconds to answer it. Take a few more seconds, almost got everybody. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll. And Dr. Sweet, we had 89% say department and 11% say management.
Okay, so the minority rules, once again, the priority should be the management team that you're on. And you might say, well, wait a second, that seems a little off. Because what happens, and this is when I do training, I go on site, this is an aha moment for many of the cultures. And that is when I go to these team meetings as a VP of HR, I act more like the United Nations or Congress. I'm there in the meetings to really honor my constituents, the HR department. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that the HR department's taken care of. But what that creates in those meetings is turf wars and silos. And so now you might think, well, no, your department would want you to be that they're number one, but actually they're grateful when all of you as a management team work together so they don't have to fight those bloody battles back at the job, that you work as a uniform team and really work with each other. So as we go forward with this assessment, we're going to go over some things to think about with that trust. I would like you to identify, if you're on the management team and you hold regular meetings, I would have you think and just be consistent to think of management team when you answer those questions. If, say, you don't have a management team and the only team you're on is the one you manage, then when you answer these following questions, go ahead and just be about your team, but try not to go back and forth. Just stick with one and move forward with that. So I'm about to share with you an assessment. This is only one part of it, but I actually go into organizations and we do a lot of team building retreats, and we really do a deep dive on some of these. But here are some samplings of what we mean by that acronym, TRUST. So the next polling question, and this is a little bit different, but it says team members acknowledge their weaknesses to one another. So in your management team, if you're a member of, or in the department of your team, is it okay culturally? Do people regularly say, here are my mistakes? These are the things that I'm not really strong in. Do people feel comfortable in sharing their weaknesses? So we'll go ahead and put a poll just to see where people are. You strongly disagree versus you strongly agree.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and launch the poll now. We'll take about a minute to answer. We'll go for about 10 more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll. So Dr. Sweet, we have 6% say strongly disagree, 39% disagree, 22% neither disagree or agree, 28% agree, and 6% strongly agree.
Yeah, so we have, the majority saying disagree, that we don't have yet a culture of trust where we can freely give that information out. And I do this in training. And one thing I do before this exercise is, and remember, unlike this group where it's not homogeneous, where we're not all from one company, these are a group all where in that training, they may have their bosses in the meeting. And so I said, we're about to share a strength and a weakness of yours. How do you feel about this exercise? And I have them fill it out anonymously. And there usually goes into 3 groups. One is, I'm scared. I am scared to share a weakness with the rest of the leadership team because of that culture that exists. Others is like, I'm pretty excited. I've never heard my boss reveal or be vulnerable that they even have a weakness. And then the other one is, I'm not really sure, but I'm eager to see how it works. So when that happens, I actually set it up kind of like a talking stick exercise, but we go in a big circle, and there could be up to 40 people in that circle, or 20. And I have a talking stick or a ball. And so I usually go first, and I will say, here's a strength and here's a weakness. And then I ask first for a volunteer, and I throw the ball to them, and then they share a strength and a weakness. After saying it, and they're the only one allowed to speak, we give that space or silence. And it's amazing of just allowing that to kind of just settle in the group of someone's strength and weakness. We don't reply, and we go ahead and continue till all 40 people speak. I do say during the strength and weakness, the weakness can't be a disguised strength. You know, the ones that you answer in interviews, you know, what is your weakness? Oh, I just work too hard. No, we want you to really be vulnerable in that situation. So I'm going to share a strength and weakness, and then shortly I'll ask you, it's all anonymous, to share a strength and weakness. So one of the strengths that I bring to the team is that I'm a learner, and I really try when doing training is to incorporate all that I've read, different resources, so it enriches the training. So I feel that's a strength. A weakness is, and this is something I'm not proud of, but I'm going to share with you because I need to, as a leader, let you know the vulnerability. And that is, I am not good at invoicing my clients. I'm not made of money, but that is something that is difficult for me to be timely in invoicing after, you know, an assignment. And that's a weakness. That's not something I would share in the job interview, but it does happen. So at this point, and we're using a different feature, if you can go ahead, and this is the chat feature or the question feature, is I want you to write in, type in, just like I revealed to you, one strength and one weakness. And the weakness can't be disguised as a perceived strength. So, Peter, can you help to just explain how to do that?
Sure. So as you guys can see the question there, we'll use the question feature box. As Dr. mentioned, it is anonymous. It will only be coming to me. I will read out a few of the answers, but your names won't be said and no one else will be able to see them. But if you use the drop down on the questions feature in the control panel, you can go ahead and type your answers there, and then we'll take a few minutes to get that going. All right, we'll take about 10 more seconds. All right, Dr. Sweet, I'll go ahead and read you off a few strengths and weaknesses. Some of the strengths I have are an achiever, able to push projects forward, in taking clients and building the program, excuse me, active listening, expertise based on experience. Some of the weaknesses we've got are patience. You have to force yourself to slow down, saying yes when I should be saying no, too aggressive, rushing during crisis mode, and personal life interferes with work on occasion.
Yeah, so these, you've done a great job. This is exactly what we're looking for, is really something that's a vulnerable side of us that we don't put on a billboard and let people know. When I do this exercise, I will usually ask, how did it make you feel to reveal that? Now, people are speaking where people, or it's not anonymous, and they do know, and they felt at first a little awkward. And then I would ask things like, how did it make you feel to hear others' responses? So go ahead. This is not in a formal way, but anyone that can go ahead and respond. How did it make you feel after Peter mentioned some strengths and weaknesses of your fellow participants? Did any emotions come as a result, or feelings overall? And go ahead
So we'll
and put it in the question feature.
Yeah. We'll take a minute to get some responses. Take about 10 more seconds. All right, so we didn't get too many on this one, but I'll just go ahead and kind of share one that's a little more common that multiple people said was that am I rethinking what my strengths and weaknesses are when you hear somebody else's strength and or weakness?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It enriches us to know where other people are. For some, for example, when I mentioned me as a weakness of invoicing, maybe someone's strength was something about accounting and bookkeeping. Then I know kind of also my go-to of who I might rely on when I need assistance. And the other might be, wow, I'm not the only one that my weakness is patience. I did this class last night, and that was one of the number ones. I think it must have been 4 or 5 different people said, I just don't have patience when people are taking too long on a project. I just want to move forward with that. So they realized, hey, my weakness is not unusual. Another, we won't actually ask you, but I did ask my class yesterday, and that is, how would it be different if you were to do it back at the job? And they would feel a little differently. They would feel that it wouldn't have been as supportive as the one in training. So that again is very revealing of your state of your culture there. And so having more where you're the leader and they see more of that vulnerability side really in some ways helps them to be more open. So that talks about the first one about talking authentically. Next is rules of engagement. And so this is a polling, and think of the team, the meetings is your most important and difficult issues are discussed in meetings. Now, I've been at an organization when I'm on site where that doesn't happen because they're too busy bickering with each other and focusing on attacking the people instead of the problem. So for this, they would strongly disagree that we can't even get to the important and difficult issues because we just can't engage with one another in a productive way. So that's the meaning behind rules of engagement and how we interact at meetings. So Peter, if you can go ahead and do this poll, it's again strongly disagree to strongly agree.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and launch the poll and we'll take about 30 seconds to answer.
Yeah, and again, this is the consistent team, either your management team or the team you direct.
Take about 10 more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and close it up and share the answers now. So we got 64% that said disagree and 36% said agree.
Yeah, so again, the majority that we just don't get to that. So a strategy that has worked well when I've been with organizations and kind of helped them through that um, is what's called a team charter or rules of engagement. So kind of piggybacking on what, especially with those that disagree that we engage appropriately, is what is your biggest frustration during team meetings? What in your particular culture frustrates you? So using the question feature, if you can just identify, where does it hurt? Where's the pain at your organization with team meetings?
Thanks, Dr. Sweet. So yeah, once again, for this one, go ahead and use the questions feature. Again, it is all anonymous, and we'll take a minute or so to respond to that. Just real quick, I just had a couple people ask about repeating the question. Again, it is, what is your biggest frustration during team meeting discussions? All right, I'll go ahead and read off some of the answers. We've got not addressing the real problem or sidestepping, ego and power trips, people afraid to express their true feelings and thoughts, hope they find it effective and positive time, those that monopolize the meeting, some team members stray away from the purpose and then time is up.
Yeah, absolutely. These are things that are not unusual, common to most organizations. So what I do, and it's something you can do, if you're not familiar, this is a worksheet I actually use in some of my training, or if you can imagine on a flip chart paper in the training, and it's a plus delta. So let's just say for the first time you're doing virtual meetings. And so you would ask your employees, the plus means what's working well in our virtual meetings. And they would say, X, Y, and Z. To the right is the plus delta, and that's really what you had answered of what's could be even better. What could we do differently to have more productive meetings? One had said about the agenda is making sure we stay on course. Some agendas, when I work with companies, we actually put the actual time for each agenda item, so we know if we're going a little off track. If you look at the left bottom quadrant, is any questions we might have. So if this was the plus delta of our virtual teams that we just started a couple of weeks ago, a question might be, well, on Zoom, can we kind of do breakout sessions? Can we, have our own chat room and then come back? Because I would feel more comfortable in our subgroups. And so we would talk about and saying, yeah, there is a feature, or I don't know that there's a feature. And then ideas is, what can we do differently? The more that, and this is something that doesn't have to take a lot of time. You could either do it where they're not prepared and we just have a meeting on that, or you give them a heads up that this is the plus delta we want to talk about, and you need to be prepared for the plus and the delta to have at least 2 items for each. And if you can quantify it, sometimes people need that tangible of what they need to bring to the table. Once you've kind of gathered all that, I've worked with organizations where they actually have rules of engagement, and sometimes people call the meeting room that they meet in like the war room or something like that. They actually have this laminated or framed on the wall where they meet. And so we come up with a list and we say, you need to attack the problem, not the person. Respect others' comments, opinions, and ideas. We talked a little bit about basketball before. John Wooden from the UCLA had some of his own rules of engagement. He said no cliques, no complaining, no criticizing, no jealousy, no egotism, no envy, no alibi. Earn the respect of all. So having those rules of engagement, sets it up to hold each other accountable, which takes me to the next part. And that is understand outcomes. And this is the next polling. And that is, in your teams, do members leave that meeting with clear resolution and action plans? Go ahead and either strongly disagree to strongly agree.
We'll launch the poll now and take about 30 seconds to answer. We'll go for about 10 more seconds. All right, close the poll. And our results show 25% said disagree, 58% said agree, and 17% said strongly agree.
Yeah, so here you see, and we have more questions for each of these assessments, but you get the idea of where we're doing better. And it sounds like from this group, if you were all of one company, that we get it right. Where we want to continue doing is maybe that we do have action plans, that we set aside action plans before the meeting, that everyone knows who needs to do it, what needs to be done, and when. And so we want to continue doing that. So that's a good barometer of where we're doing well in team and where we can improve upon. Next is seek peer accountability. So they don't rely on the leader to hold people accountable, that we can hold each other accountable. And this is separate than finger pointing. So we can be more of a self-managed team where we can say, and I do in training team exercises. So I give them a team exercise, and you'll see within the team that they hold each other accountable for, well, what do you think about this question that Barbara just posed? Or, and trying to make sure that someone can't just be silent. They have to pull their weight. So this is our next poll.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and launch that now. It'll take about 30 seconds. Ten more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and share the results now. So 8% say strongly disagree, 33% said disagree, 42% agreed, and 17% strongly agreed.
So you can see how the polls are doing that. Being a self-managed team, you have it in place where people will hold others accountable, and so people feel a sense of fairness. And then here, going on to the next one, is team results, and that's team members are quick to share the achievements and contributions of others. And they're okay if they're not, people know about what they've accomplished, but I'm happy to share how others have done well. And this will be, I believe, our last poll.
Yep, we'll go ahead and launch it and take about 30 seconds to answer. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll now. And we had a 9% say disagree, 9% neither disagree or agree, 64% agree, and 18% strongly agree.
Okay, Okay, so there's some best practices out there. For those that had disagreed, there's ways that I work with organizations that we promote just a wall dedicated to team accomplishments and having pictures taken or what we've done differently as a result of the team. A history, so you'd have on the wall the history of the team, when it was founded and what accomplishments. So there's different ways that we can really focus on and the results of the team. Some have it where if everyone does well, they get, say, a day off, or they get an ice cream social, something to bring the team together. So we've talked about a lot during this 1-hour webinar. I really appreciate your being highly engaged. We talked about that motivation is an inside job. However, we have the ability to inspire by looking at ways we can truly give them autonomy, let them put their fingerprint signature on that. Mastery is really where's their strength, where's their sweet spot, and can I give them more best days, and really remind them and emphasize their purpose, that they are making someone else's life, internal or external to the organization, better. And then we talked about culture, and it's really about the undercurrents of what happens during those deep change moments. So I want to just leave you with a quote, and that is, the role of a great leader is not to give greatness to human beings, but really to help them extract the greatness that's already inside of them. So I want to thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your participation. You get to see where you stand, your company, with other companies as well. I'll turn it over to Peter.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Dr. Sweet. So I'd like to thank Dr. Barbara Sweet, COC, and the Employee Training Institute once again for this valuable information. And thanks to everyone who was able to join us. I know this webinar was, it's more interactive, as some of you saw last week, and then the ones who joined us this week. So if anything does arise, please go ahead and email hello@scvchamber.com. I'll go ahead and pass your question off to Dr. Barbara Sweet, and we'll do our best to answer. As she did mention last week, we are going to put together a resource kind of document page for you guys that kind of outlines everything we went over the past 2 webinars, and we'll get that sent over to everyone. For additional business resources, please visit scvchamber.com under the COVID-19 tab for more details. Thanks again for joining us. Please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know how the Chamber can help you. Thank you again, Dr. Sweet, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you, everyone.